All right, so what is knowledge? That's what we're going to be looking at. This is the first of the topics on epistemology. Knowledge is difficult to define, as we know. Knowledge isn't a straightforward subject. So epistemology, the unit on epistemology means the study of knowledge. It comes from the two Greek terms, episteme, which means something like theoretical knowledge, and logos, meaning the study of. So in philosophy, what we're asking is, what is knowledge and how do we define knowledge in this topic? So there are three types of knowledge for the purposes of our studying. The first one is acquaintance knowledge. Acquaintance knowledge is the base of knowledge. It's all of the direct experience we have when we have our first conscious contact with something in the world. That is where our knowledge starts. So it's knowledge in the form of direct experience, i.e. knowledge of something. So you can have knowledge of, say, a person. So you're in the college and you walk around the college and you see someone and you recognise them. Maybe someone you like or fancy or something. And you keep recognising that person that is walking around the college. You know of them, but you don't know anything about them. You don't know their name, you don't know any facts about them, you don't know anything other than just being able to recognise that person. Or another example is, say, having knowledge of a place that you've been to. You can bring back that memory, but again, you might not know anything about that place. It's just that raw, first-hand experience that you have of a thing without necessarily knowing any information about it. It's linked to, in metaphysics of mind, what we call qualia as well. You might know by now, but qualia is that what is it like to have a conscious experience of a thing like redness. It's somewhat linked to that. The second is ability knowledge. Ability knowledge is knowledge in the form of skills. So it's knowledge of how to do something. For example, knowledge of how to walk or juggle or run or talk. And then you have propositional knowledge. That's the knowledge that we're interested in epistemology, this theoretical knowledge. It's knowledge in the form of factual information, i.e. knowledge that something is the case, all the information that you have. So the kind of knowledge that we're normally talking about is propositional knowledge. For example, that philosophy means love of wisdom, or that Earth is spherical. Perhaps that's up for debate. A proposition then is just a simple statement about the world. That's what a proposition is, a simple statement about the world. So in terms of defining knowledge, we're going to be looking at the tripartite view of knowledge, which comes from ancient Greek times, from the Meno in Plato's dialogues. And the idea here is that knowledge is three things, hence tripartite, three parts. So for anyone, S, to know some proposition P, P has to be true, for one. So it has to be true, has to actually correspond or cohere with the matter of fact about the world, i.e. Earth is spherical. S has to believe that P, so you have to believe that it's true. And you have to be justified in believing P, believing the proposition. So this is knowledge as justified true belief, or JTB. The justification bit's quite important, because it's not good enough just to have a true belief. You can't just have a lucky true belief, like a guess. You believe it's true, it is true, but you haven't really reasoned or anything. You've got no real reason for why you believe it's true. You've just sort of like picked it out of thin air. And I believe this thing and it happens to be true. We don't want to consider that knowledge. We don't want to pick a guide to guide us to Larissa who can get us there but just guesses the whole way. And it just so happens by sheer chance that they've had all these true beliefs. Socrates calls it a tethered belief. We want our beliefs to be tethered to something. And for that belief to be tethered, it has to be justified. There has to be some justification, some good reason for why you believe it. And of course, it has to be true. So that was a long-standing belief or a long-standing definition of knowledge. And then along comes Edmund Gettier in the early 20th century, late 20th century. And we call this the Gettier problem, because Edmund Gettier, came up with a few counterexamples to the tripartite view of knowledge, which showed that, in fact, you could have a case where you have a justified true belief, a JTB, but it not be considered knowledge, because it's a lucky JTB. So we've got a few of these quirky examples. So these are hypothetical examples of a lucky JTB. And we don't want luck in our criteria of knowledge. That's why it shows that actually a JTB does not entail knowledge. It's not the case that in all cases a JTB means you've got knowledge. So the first one we're going to look at is the Smith and Jones case. Here's how it goes. Smith and Jones go for a job interview. During this job interview, Smith sees Jones with 10 coins in his pocket, because he's counted 10 coins. He sees Smith with 10 coins in his pocket. Smith is also told that Jones will get the job. So he comes to the conclusion on those two premises that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket and Jones will get the job, that the man with 10 coins in his pocket will get the job. That's his quirky conclusion. And he's justified here. He has quite a good, what seems like a deductive argument here. Instead of Jones getting the job, actually Smith gets the job. Okay, so it turns out that Smith actually gets the job, and also, circumstantially, Smith has 10 coins in his pocket. So his conclusion that the man with 10 coins in his pocket will get the job turns out to be true, even though it wasn't Jones who got the job. It was actually Smith. So Smith has a justified true belief. He was justified in coming to his conclusion, and his conclusion is true. It's just not that Jones got the job. It's a lucky JTB. It just turns out that actually Smith got the job and he had 10 coins in his pocket and he's a man. So that's the first one of a lucky JTB that we don't want to consider knowledge. Second one, Brown in Barcelona. Smith sees Jones driving a Ford. Okay? So Smith makes this random proposition. He says either Jones owns a Ford or randomly, just picks out of nowhere, random proposition, Brown is in Barcelona. And remembering with or statements, so with a disjunctive statement, only one of the two clauses out of A or B has to be true for the statement to be true. It turns out Jones doesn't actually own a Ford, he was just driving a Ford. But by circumstance, by sheer chance, Brown is actually in Barcelona, even though Smith didn't know that. However, his statement, Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona, is true. He believes the statement, and he was justified in believing it. He was justified because you can make such a statement, a disjunctive statement, if you believe that at least one of them is true. However, we would like to say that this is a lucky JTB because it didn't come off the back of the first assumption, which was that Jones owns a Ford, because Smith sees Jones driving a Ford. Number 3, the fake Barron County case. Now this is Goldman's case. So the first two were from Gettier. This one's from Goldman. How this goes is Barney is driving through fake Barron County. So he's driving through fake Barron County, and in fake Barron County, 99% of the barns are fake. Whilst Barney is driving through fake Barron County, it just so turns out, okay, that he picks out the one real barn in fake barn county and says, there's a barn. Now he could have done this with any other barn, but it just circumstantially by chance turns out that he's picked out the real barn and stated, there's a barn. So he's right. It is a barn, it's a real barn. And he was justified in coming to his belief that that is a real barn because he's just used his normal faculties to come to the conclusion that that's a barn. However, this is again a lucky JTB. It's a lucky JTB because if he did that with any of the other barns, he would have been wrong. It's just by chance that he's picked out the only real barn. Number 4, sheep in the field case. Similar to fake barn county case in some ways. This time, a farmer looks into the field and sees what he thinks is a sheep. And he says, there's a sheep in the field. It turns out the sheep is actually a dog disguised as a sheep. It's a dog in fancy dress, looks like a sheep. It's not really a sheep. However, over the hill, there is actually a real sheep in the field. So again, by chance, it turns out that he is right. There is a sheep in the field. It just wasn't the sheep that he pointed out. Now, he's still got a justified true belief, some may say, because he's used his normal faculties to come to a conclusion that there's a sheep in the field because there's something that looks like a sheep. And it is true because there is a sheep beyond the hill. It's just a lucky justified true belief because it wasn't actually that sheep that made it true. Last one, broken clock case. So, you look at a clock, you see that it says 12 o'clock. The clock's actually broken, but you don't know it. So you make the statement, it's 12 o'clock. However, it is actually 12 o'clock right now. But the clock hasn't helped you to tell the time because the clock's broken. It's right twice a day, sure, but only by sheer chance is it actually 12 o'clock right now. So you have a justified true belief. It's true, it's 12. You believe that it's true, and you've used what you would normally think is a justified way of telling the time, i.e. looking at a clock. But you just didn't know that the clock was broken. So there we have another lucky JTB. So those are our 5 main cases that we need to know for epistemology of lucky JTBs. So these are all examples of where you would have a JTB that isn't considered knowledge. Counterexamples to the tripartite view of knowledge. So there are some solutions. We're going to look at 4 solutions here. First one is infallibilism. Infallibilism is the view that your justification must be infallible. So in terms of these solutions, what these solutions are proposing to do is add some extra criteria to the JTB definition or change the criteria of JTB in order to safeguard us against these Gettier cases. So what these solutions are trying to do is solve the Gettier problem, where we can have a strong criteria for knowledge. First one, infallibilism. All this is saying is that whatever justification you have has to be infallible, which means it cannot possibly be false. So you have a justified true belief plus the justification is infallible. That's what equals knowledge, according to the infallibilist. And of course, this is quite strong because it solves pretty much all of the Gettier cases. Because in terms of all the Gettier cases, that element of luck and chance would be ruled out by infallibilism. Because they want knowledge to be so strong, so certain, that they couldn't include these lucky cases. The problem with that, though, is that it's just too strong. It rules out probably about 90%, 99% of our knowledge base. Because there's always going to be elements in our knowledge base where there could be some justification that could potentially be false. We're all philosophers. We know that there is criticism of everything.
Should I grab that stuff if you've got one, mate?
Come in, yeah, of course. So we know that there is criticism of everything. So that's what it does. It rules out much of our knowledge base. If you remember Descartes' cogito ergo sum, if you've got there, okay, I think therefore I am. For Descartes, the only knowledge we have that is certain was his foundational belief that he is at least a thinking thing. It could be false that everything here in the world is actually real. So Descartes went through this stage of doubting everything. He could doubt his senses, he could doubt that he's not just in some sort of dream world, or he could even doubt that the whole of reality is not some great deception. And there's no way of him knowing that anything here is actually real. Just like when you're in a dream and you can be genuinely mistaken for having a conversation with someone, when actually there's no one really there. That's just a figment of your own mind, your own imagination, your little dream world, where no one in the dream is real, no matter how much you think they're real at that time, no matter how sophisticated your conversation with that person, they're just simply not there. For Descartes, there's no way of proving that this isn't the same kind of case, this reality. But the only thing he couldn't doubt was that he is at least a doubting thing. It has to be self-evidently true that if you are thinking or doubting, then you must at least be a thinking, doubting thing. But in terms of knowledge, of course that's infallible. And there's a few other things that are infallible, a little bit like that. But it rules out everything else that wouldn't allow us to live a practical life. So that's why infallibilism just isn't good enough. It's just too strong. We can't have that much certainty in a knowledge base. That would rule out pretty much all of science. So then we have no false lemmas. So again, this is in addition to JTB, JTB plus no false lemmas. So in here, what we're saying is that your justification cannot include any false premises. That's what a lemma means. A lemma is like a subsidiary proposition or some kind of premise that's relied on to infer something else. So for the Smith and Jones case, the lemma in that was, if you remember, there's the Jones has 10 coins in his pocket, Jones will get the job, therefore. So the lemma that's false is that Jones will get the job because the boss told him. That was false because Jones didn't get the job. So here we're saying JTB plus no false lemmas is basically saying that you cannot have something in your justification that would be wrong, hence that Jones will get the job. But of course that doesn't solve all the cases. Doesn't solve the fate by encounter case, doesn't solve the sheep in the field case, doesn't solve the broken clock case, so it's no good. So then that's kind of changed a little bit to this no essential false assumptions. So going back to that broken clock case, you cannot have some false assumption, some hidden false assumption in there that this is a working clock, and a false assumption that the boss is telling the truth in the Smith and Jones case. So they make it a little bit stronger, but ultimately what we find with that, so yeah, no hidden false assumptions, but what we find is that it just turns to this problem that infallibilism has. It becomes too strong. We make so many assumptions in life. We cannot have a criteria for knowledge that says we cannot have any hidden false assumptions, because it just basically entails infallibilism, that you cannot have something potentially fallible. We make so many assumptions that could potentially be false, so it just doesn't work. So our third case, our third solution is reliabilism. Reliabilism is just to change the JTB definition to a reliable true belief. And what reliabilists say is the only things we can consider knowledge are true beliefs that are formed from a reliable cognitive process. And what that means is a cognitive process that connects the belief to the truth. So we call this truth tracking. So what's reliable is basically the fact that your justification, say, or whatever process you've gone through to gain knowledge, connects that belief that you have to the truth of the thing. So for example, in the sheep in the field case, we might say that that's not reliable. We might say it's not reliable because ultimately he's looked at what looks like a sheep, but it's not a sheep. So he probably hasn't examined it enough. And because of that, the belief that he had that there's a sheep in the field hasn't actually been connected to the truth of the matter, because the truth of the matter was that there is a sheep in the field, but it's beyond the hill, the one that he hasn't seen. So that's the solution here. The truth tracking wasn't made in that case. The problem with reliabilism is the criteria for it's too vague. there isn't any good criteria for what counts as reliable. And because there isn't any good criteria for what counts as reliable, it makes the solution difficult. It makes it difficult in our definition of knowledge. And potentially doesn't really help us solve all the cases. So it needs to be a little bit more rigorous. So our last solution is virtue epistemology. This is perhaps the best solution. This is to say that a JTB has to be formed through what we call epistemic or intellectual virtues. And to have a bit more of a rigorous definition of this, unlike reliabilism, we've got SOSA's AAA rating. There's many different types of intellectual virtues out there. Things like being open-minded, not being closed-minded, seeing all the evidence, being thorough with weighing up the evidence, for example, not being ignorant to things. And for Sosa, Ernest Sosa, he thought that you had to have these three things: accuracy, adroitness, and aptness. And they have to come together. So what that means is accuracy. Imagine it like an archer, okay? You want to know who's the best archer. What's the archer with the most virtues of archery? The archer has to hit the point. It has to hit the bullseye. Obviously, you want the most accurate archer, sure. But you also want an archer that's skillful, has got good technique. So you know that that technique is responsible for the accuracy. And that's where the aptness comes in. A good archer has to be accurate because of their skill, because of their technique. So you know that they are going to be accurate oftentimes. They are, I suppose, reliable. Now this solves many of the Gettier cases, because what we see is that many of the Gettier cases where you come to a justified true belief based on luck doesn't have this last criteria of aptness. Because if you come to a justified true belief and we want to consider that knowledge, it's also probably got to be apt. Apt meaning it's right because of the intellectual skills you've used. So sheep in the field case, we wouldn't consider that knowledge under the virtue epistemology definition because he hasn't got a justified true belief in the sense of it's not apt that he's accurate. Yes, there is a sheep in the field, but there's not a sheep in the field because he's used his intellectual skills. Because if he uses intellectual skills, he would know that the dog disguised as a sheep wasn't actually a sheep. Therefore, it's not a justified true belief. And we might say the same about the fake by encounter case, for example, and the rest of the cases. So perhaps this is a more stronger solution to the Gettier case. However, last problem with virtue epistemology is it's hard to determine whether your belief was true because of your intellectual virtues. So the problem with virtue epistemology is, one, defining what intellectual virtues are, because there are probably debates around that, and then again, actually making that connection between a true belief you have and the justification you have for that true belief in terms of the intellectual virtues you've used. So how do you know at all times you're going to know that a clock is, say, working, for example, or that you were right on that occasion because of your exercise of intellectual virtues? So that's the end of the JTB topic in a nutshell. That's a revision for knowledge as JTB, or definition of knowledge. But what's worth considering here is just the different problems around the solutions, and for your 25 markers, be thinking about what is perhaps the strongest solution, or whether there is even a solution at all, and then being able to actually evaluate those solutions and stating with clear reason which ones you think are the strongest and why. So which arguments you think are the strongest and why, or the most crucial against the less crucial arguments. But knowledge is difficult, and yeah, that's that. I'll say no more.